Hello, listeners. Today we have Wendy McNeill with us. She was adopted at the age of 12, and she has a fascinating story. So listen in, and you will hear her difficult and yet beautiful story. Does your child have a speech-language delay, and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life, and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist, and you wonder, what do they do, and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dinalynn Rosenbush. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned, because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. Hey listeners, I am so glad to have you here today. As a reminder, on August 20th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, that would be Chicago time, there will be a free open hour of office hours with the SLP, that is group coaching, that is come with your questions, and we'll have a conversation. So check your calendar, write it in, and adapt the time zone to meet your time zone, and then sign up in the link in the show notes below. Now let's get started with the interview with Wendy McNeill. Wendy, thank you for being here on the Language of Play today. I appreciate you taking time to tell your story. And we know that adoption is so important, and it's rare, more rare, I think, for kids to be adopted older. But thank you for telling your story, and I will just let you take it and go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm Wendy McNeill. I was originally raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and my parents ended up separating. I'm not sure as a young person what happened, but my mother ended up moving myself and my siblings to mainland United States. My father did not come along. Somewhere there was a divorce, and she ended up marrying someone from the mainland who was a white male, blonde, blue-eyed, and we ended up staying here. My birth father did not follow us, so eventually my mother's husband adopted us, so he became my adopted father. So there was probably a relinquishment of some kind by my birth father. Because of that, I was about 12 years old, so I had an awareness of sitting in the courtroom. I have 2 birth certificates from my birth father and my adopted father. And I basically had to go through the journey not only of leaving my culture of Puerto Rico, but once we came to the mainland, I had to learn English and get myself integrated into the academic system. When I was going through elementary school in the 70s, the town that I grew up in Wyoming, there was no ESL. So we had to learn English to be able to learn the academics and to get integrated in society. I remember being pulled out of the classrooms on a regular basis to go through not only tutoring to get my academics where they needed to be, but also to work on my speech. I have a speech impediment. So we had to clean that up as I was learning English. So there was a lot of that. I also have some learning disability. I was diagnosed about 2 years old. which I found later in my records, which was interesting. But those things I found caused turmoil in myself. I really didn't have an outlet for both the grief and the gratitude. With adoption, there is grief because of the loss of the birth father, and then the gratitude of starting a new life in a beautiful country where I can have the opportunities to live the life that I have today. So I had to create a place for myself to be able to navigate some of that. And I found that through journaling. I had a lot of journaling to be able to express some of what I was feeling, what I was navigating, the grief and also the gratitude, just to keep myself balanced in a healthy place. I also leaned heavily on my faith in Jesus Christ. I am a Christian. And the balance of those two helped me. I didn't always get it right. And I remember there are times in which mom sent us to therapy. I wasn't sure why, but I knew there were problems with, I don't know, the trauma of the marriage, the trauma of the separation, but something was causing problems in the home. So we would go as it was herself and us children to the therapist to try to navigate some of that. That part I did know. I don't remember the details of what happened in the meeting, but I do remember her taking us there. And eventually I was able to get integrated into society, go through academics, and be able to have the life I live today.
Wow, that's quite a journey.
Yes.
First, I want to acknowledge, thank you for telling us this journey. And there are so many questions I have all the way through your journey. And so when you talk about the therapy journey, like there were problems in home, and I want to recognize that your mom was really brave. In the 70s, it was very less common, very much less common to go seek therapy. So she must have been very, very brave, wise woman to realize you don't just spank this out of children.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's pretty much what was done in that generation. And so I'm really glad for you. What was, yeah, and you said you don't remember what it was like in that session, but how did it change the home life? Could you tell? Do you have a memory of that?
I believe the therapy sessions, we ended up talking about my birth father. So I think the trauma of the adoption was expressing itself in the home. I remember saying, I miss my father. I miss my father. Now, I didn't understand the legalities of adoption of, he's no longer my father. All I knew is he was there and I was here. And I was trying to navigate that. So I think that was causing problems, the balance of the grief and the gratitude. And I think the grief was probably expressing itself in the home to the point that she had us go to the counseling.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like how you separate this out, the grief and the gratitude, because they can coexist.
Yes.
And the grief is expressing itself through the behavior in the home. And I think that that's another thing to remember too, is that behavior is a communication. And so grief expressing yourself is you're communicating, but kids don't think like adults. And so the kids don't do things logically. Sometimes adults don't either, but you've got a child that has all this emotional trauma, and our ways as children to express ourselves is going to be through our bodies. So that was wisdom on your mom's part to go seek that therapist. And it sounds like your therapist was able to isolate what was happening, which was that longing you're saying. That's a lot for a child to process. How long did it take?
Yes. I don't know how long it took, but I know that I would go to school and I would have my Bible with me. So I was always reading it. That was my anchor. And also I journaled a lot. And I think that was a place for me to be able to express my grief and also to process it. And over time, it was integrating into my new life. I had less and less contact with my birth father. So I was able to integrate into the new society, into America, and to the life that I have right now.
Good, good. You mentioned learning disability and speech impediment in your early years. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I know I have a stutter that came from my birth father. As an adult, we were able to reconnect. I asked him about that. I said, I have this, where did it come from? And he said it came from his side. He has it too. So it was something that I picked up from his side of the family. So that was good to know. It wasn't anything I did. So,
You sound very
and
good.
oh, thank you. It's a lot of hard work. And also, I have problems with the letters get switched sometimes, transposed, which I
Hmm.
think is also connected to the stammer. And also, autism runs in my family. So when I found my records that said learning disability at 2 years old, I think I was probably starting to pick up probably some borderline autism because I saw my mother looking back, she was very aloof and there was a way she processed things that was different from others. I also have a nephew that is special needs with autism. So I think that is what causes me to have differences with people sometimes, is that a little bit of that. Now, it's not at the point that it interferes because, I'm self sufficient. I support myself. I was able to get through the Air Force just fine. But I do have those moments of, I feel like I'm having a different conversation than other people. It's like,
Sure.
we're not connecting here somehow. Or I will take things literally when it wasn't intended to be literally. So there are definite things that it comes up that I know I'm in a different place than everybody else and we're not connecting. And they'll look at me weird and I won't know how to respond. I thought, why are you looking at me weird? Oh,
I think that's the right way to respond. Just
yeah.
ask. Yeah, I think
So
that's great.
and as a child I had that, but I think that was just all part of my speech and everything else. So I ended up lumping all of that into one big thing of I know I'm different in several ways. And that's how I processed life.
And that's hard for a kid.
Hmm.
It's hard for adults, but it's really hard for a child, especially in those teen years when you want to be uniquely the same as everybody else, you know. And so when you process and think of yourself as different, how did that impact your
Hmm.
adult life?
I found myself, some of those traits continued because I still get some of the same looks. I still have moments where I'm processing the conversation completely different than everybody else. And I can tell because body language communication is just off. We're just not on the same page when I'm speaking. And I process as an adult by just probably the same way, just like, okay, let's change the subject, or why don't we do this over here? For me, because language can be a challenge sometimes, not just in the speaking, but in the communication. I tend to be hands-on. My philanthropy is I volunteer at the food bank. So it's very hands-on, processing food and things like that. So the work itself doesn't require communication, but I can still be engaged with other volunteers. So it keeps me engaged socially in a healthy place so that I'm still able to still build up some of those skill sets as well.
I'm proud of you.
No,
That's
thank you.
that's a lot. And it sounds like you have carried this forward into your adult life, but you are successful. You are building relationships. Would you say you've got good friendships now?
Actually, I don't have friendships. I do have acquaintances, but like a strong friendship, I don't have that because I think it's the problems with connecting with people. Is just I always feel like I'm off everybody else.
Do
Either they could be very emotional and I'm not, so I don't pick up on some of that, or they're wanting to be close. And for me, it's like conversation's over. Thank you. Have a nice day. And I move on.
Sure.
So that connection doesn't happen sometimes.
Mhm.
But when I'm around the same people, it's like we reconnect again. So it's like I have connections in certain settings, and then I just cut those off. It's like, okay, that section's over. So I have very segmented. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
So
do you think that this is more a trauma response that's residual, that there's a trust issue, or do you think that it's more sensory in that it's more of an autism issue? Because it seems like it could be either one to me. Which, do you have an indication of what you think it might be?
sometimes I know it's from the trauma because if I get close with somebody but I'm rejected, sometimes my mind will go back of, oh, I'm being abandoned again. That'll cross my mind for a minute. And then the logic side will kick in and say, okay, let's think about what happened in the conversation. So I still have those moments where that adoption experience is still trying to come in.
Yeah.
And then I have to pull myself back and try to find a balance.
Yeah.
Is it they don't want me around, or we're just not communicating and we're just crossing wires? And it's that constant navigation through life as to how I do that.
It's almost like a reaction to attaching. So did you get diagnosed then with reactive attachment disorder?
I don't know if I did.
Okay.
Because the results of the therapy wasn't really shared with us kids.
Sure.
I just know we went, and then we would leave the room and mom would speak with the therapist
Sure.
for next steps. So there's a lot of that I was not told.
Sure. You've made yourself very vulnerable today, Wendy, and I admire that.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
I hope it's helpful for others.
I know it will be, because there's so many issues that we deal with, and everybody has a different soup of issues, and we can glean from other people's stories the parts that help us. And I know that the listeners will benefit from hearing your story. So I really thank you for being as vulnerable and as open as you've chosen to be. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review, and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.